resume the recording. Dave, feel free to keep your tie on if you'd like, or you don't have to. But since it's 12 o'clock and we've got a pretty robust agenda, would love to get started. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. And thank you for your interest. We actually have an oversold event. And I think that speaks a lot to folks eager to learn about the inside scoop. How does a newsroom work? Why do some stories get told? Why do others not get told? How do I become a better storyteller and partner up with folks in the media? So thank you again for your interest in this. We've got a really exciting panel I'll introduce in a second, but really a great mix of reporter, editor, assignment editor, publicist, a lot of different media models and even some changing media models. So I'm excited to share that with you. As I mentioned, this is oversold on Zoom, but we took a page out of Delta Airlines and we are bumping everybody for a free round trip on Facebook Live. So to that end, this is being streamed live now on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you. Shout out to our colleague Katie Source for making that happen. So for those of you that are here in Zoom, please put notes or questions in the chat and I'll try to moderate as we go. If there's something that's very specific or if we run out of time, I'll share the questions with our panelists and encourage them to answer offline. For those of you that are watching this live stream on social media, please put some notes in the comments and we will try to answer things in real time or share those with the 18th of 2021. Things change quickly. So for those of you that are watching this on demand in the future, please view it with that in mind. A lot of the things we're going to talk about, policies, technologies, and things like that, and even process and workflow is subject to change very quickly, especially in this business. So again, thank you for tuning in. I think this will be a very interesting perspective and a unique perspective on news, how news works, how it happens from the insider's view, the workflow, the people involved. And speaking of people involved, let me first introduce our panelists and then we'll roll right into the conversation. So seated at the front of the room immediately to my left is Karen Tararache. She is the new managing editor at Spectrum News for the Capital Region. She oversees about a dozen multimedia journalists working with them to select and develop stories that are considered, I guess, features in nature, but at their core really contain timely news elements. She had worked, as many of you know, as an anchor and reporter for more than a dozen years. She started her career as a traffic reporter and ultimately became international correspondent, anchoring and reporting in Moscow, Russia. Karen and her husband are also online nutrition coaches. Karen's also a fellow triathlete. And through their business Sense Fitness, they've been helping hundreds of people nationwide lose weight, regain control of their health and confidence. So Karen, thank you for joining us with all those perspectives in mind. Seated to Karen's right, maybe, I guess, depends on where it's on your screen. Dave Lombardo is the host of WCNY'S Capitol Pressroom, and he's joining us from the Capitol Pressroom itself. That's a daily statewide public radio program that focuses on state government and politics. In another life, Dave was Capitol reporter for the Albany Times-Union, where he created a podcast series about the 2009 Senate coup in Albany. David also has experience handling communications for political campaign, elected officials, and even a nonprofit think tank. He is currently rehabbing his left knee in anticipation of a spring softball season and is looking forward to getting all-you-can-eat sushi for his birthday with his friends, if permissible, in June. Also on our panel, Leanne Ricchiuti is Overit's public relations account executive responsible for developing and pitching a variety of content and events on behalf of Overit's clients. She spent a decade shaping stories for Spectrum News Capital Region as assignment editor, where she learned the elements of a successful story. She now consistently secures, a tremendous amount of earned media for her clients annually across the state, throughout the Northeast and around the country. She's a fierce supporter of American Heart Association. Her mother is a heart survivor. She volunteers with Equinox, Capital Roots, and the Albany Police Athletic League. And her son Grayson turns 2 this week. So shout out to G. I think both Karen and Leanne have a G. And I'm Paul Fahey. I'm representing sort of the publicist side of things. I've never been in the newsroom as a journalist, but have worked really on more the PR side of things and representing that perspective.
Nobody's perfect.
I've worked with a number of different client perspectives, serving as spokesperson, in particular, pretty significant experience with crisis PR for clients such as the Citadel Military College, Brooklyn Hospital Center, among a number of others. This is my first global pandemic, but I've actually managed several infectious outbreaks for hospital and health system clients. And when Karen was on the western part of Russia in Moscow, I was spending time in Kyrgyzstan working with their public health policy folks as they were trying to get news placed. But at the time, the Kyrgyzstani government was shifting from a government-controlled media to an independent, albeit corrupt, private media in a very diverse political and tribal community. So that's certainly not certainly not the environment we're talking about today. So as you're tuning in and joining us to learn more about how to tell stories and how a story gets told, it does not get told with exchange of cash. So anyway, thank you for joining us today, and I'll be your host and moderator. So let's dive right in, and let's start with, I guess, that sort of headline that you folks had signed up for. Why do some stories make headlines and others never get told? Karen, let me start with you.
Well, I can speak obviously to the medium that I work in, and that's television. It's a visual medium. So when we get together and we discuss what stories we're going to tell for the day, what stories our viewers care about, what stories people are not gathering around the water cooler anymore, but are tweeting about, are interested in, it's what's going to be visual, right? You know, you're changing the channel or you're swiping left or right or up or down on your cell phone, and what's going to catch your attention? It might be a headline, but it's going to be a picture. It's going to be a video. It's going to be an image. And for us in television, in a newsroom, number one priority obviously is what is important, what's out there, what are the facts, but number two is how is this going to be a visual story? And that's where we start.
Dave, let me ask you, how, you're in a political environment and there's a lot going on. In any given legislative cycle, there's 10,000 bills. Why do 40 of those make it to headlines and others simply don't?
Well, I think for this audience, one of the things I think is worth talking about is the relationships that reporters have with the PR professionals. I think that, there are people that I turn to as sort of trusted sources who help me, parse what's important and what's not. And these are people that I've developed relationships with, whether it's because I've done the outreach or they've done the outreach, and that I can't turn to them when I need to figure out what to do, what's the big story this week. And those are relationships that are forged not necessarily over a coffee, because reporters don't actually get breaks and probably don't want to spend time with PR people, but over meaningful, say, background or off the record phone conversations. So I think that's one of the big things for me, is these sort of trusted validators.
Interesting thought. I've often wondered, perhaps as a trusted or mistrusted validator, is it easier to identify a story when it comes in through a publicist versus the client itself? Do you have a better sense of what their angle is, what their agenda is, what they're going to get out of it?
I think it really depends on if they're able to convey that story. So, sometimes you'll have a publicist who thinks they have a gist of what this story is, and they're not good at conveying it, and vice versa. The person who actually has the information is bad at conveying it. So I think that's really important, is to be able to make that pitch in a comprehensive and understandable way. So I mean, if I was the PR person and I don't understand what I'm telling someone, that should be my first red flag when I'm making that pitch, because the reporter, who's our knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep, is definitely not going to know about it, especially if it's the first time we're ever hearing about it.
Also, I'll add to that what Dave just said is the whole package, right? It's not just the present that you're getting inside of the beautiful bows and the gift wrapping. I want to know that this is a product, or this is a story, or this is something that you're pitching to me that I can present in a beautiful way visually, right? So if you're telling me I have this great thing that is going to sanitize COVID off of every surface and we've invented it, awesome. I'd love to see it. I'd love to know all about it. But if you have somebody who's going to stand there in front of the camera and not be able to tell me about it, it's going to be really hard to get that full picture, that full presentation out to the viewers.
Leanne, let me bring you into this because prior to being colleagues, you know, I was pitching you stories and some got told, others didn't. And we'll talk about sort of the roles in the newsroom in a second, but from your perspective, why do some stories get told, others don't?
The biggest thing so Paul's referencing my time as an assignment editor at Spectrum News. And the biggest hurdle that you need to jump if you're reaching out to a news organization, I felt, was how much of an impact is this story going to have? Karen kind of touched on that a little bit in her answer, is that you need to have an impact of multiple people. It's much less likely for me to do a story about someone who had a bad day at the supermarket and wants to get the manager in trouble because of whatever it is that they're doing that upset them, than someone affecting an entire store of customers. You want the biggest impact for the community, how it's affecting everyone, and then depending on the niche or your medium, that's when you get into whether or not it's a visual component or a good story for a newspaper or another medium.
And the timeliness of that pitch really matters too. Sometimes, you got to read the room. So if you're pitching me right now a story that's not related to the governor's handling of nursing home deaths in COVID, during the pandemic, I'm probably going to ignore you. But, at the same time, you might think, say, like election day or the Monday before election day is not the right time to bring something up that's not election news. When in fact, though, assignment editors, and I've been in this position at the Daily Gazette, they're looking for something that's not political and not electiony, so that they have other content. So you kind of have to be able to read the room as well in terms of the timing.
So let me ask that, and actually this is building on one of the comments that's coming into the chat. When somebody is reaching out to you, how do you balance that full package? I want to tell you about the full impact of this story versus that cold pitch. Is it email, and does that subject line in a one sentence grabber make sense, and keep reading paragraphs? Am I calling you? Am I texting you? How does that work? Karen?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, unless I do have a relationship with people like you, people like Leanne, other press people, other people in the community, chances are I get thousands of emails a day. I'm not going to read it. I'm really just going to hit delete. So if you're going to send me an email, then yeah, it'd probably be smart to follow up with one of our reporters. It'd be smart to find a way to make yourself, put yourself in that person's face almost. But again, it does boil down to the pitch. And unfortunately for me, if I don't know you, it's going to be very hard for me to actually sit there. I do have an inbox of story pitch ideas. It's a separate folder in my Outlook, and if I get to it, I get to it, and hopefully I didn't miss something good. But you want to establish those relationships with people like Dave, people who that you're pitching those stories to, right? Know your audience. So if it's something that we can't miss and we need to put on the air, and it has all of the great elements, it has the character, it has the conflict, it has the timeliness, the visual aspect, then yeah, find a way to get in touch with me, get a hold of me. I mean, we're all accessible: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm not on Snapchat anymore, but hey, you can find me.
Dave, how about you? How do you or your colleagues or peers like to be pitched or get that story?
With regards to that specific question, the idea of the full package, sometimes I forget what the expression is, like too long, didn't read. It can just be overwhelming. So, like what Karen's saying about all these emails you get. And I've been sending Karen a lot of emails, and that explains now why she's not responding to my efforts to hang out. I'm going to try, I'll reach out to her TikTok. But for me, I like, a 2-sentence pitch. And then if I want additional info, I'll reach out. I'll say, can you explain to me more about this? And what I like to do is call the person and just say, hey, could we do a background conversation about this before we have the actual conversation, so I can ask all my dumb questions now? And that's more about my medium, which is, I have to be kind of polished for the actual show itself. I need to know kind of what the answers are going to be so I can write my questions. As a reporter, you don't really need, as a reporter for print news outlet like I was at the Times Union, you don't need that sort of extra layer. But I like, the brevity, that quick cold pitch, one's first sentence saying basically like, hey, here's what's going on in the news, and two, here's why I've got a hook on that, and here's my cell phone to call me immediately, and be super accessible, people. Cell phones, personal emails, available after 5 p.m. also on the weekends too, because there are so many weekend reporters who are just looking for that story.
Yeah. And that kind of, when I'm working with my clients now, and it's very difficult to try and convey to clients who don't understand the inner workings of a newsroom that you have less than 30 seconds to get the interest of the reporter or the person who picked up the phone. Less than 30 seconds. And having sat at that desk where I'm the one picking up the phone, it's because I've got 20 other phone calls waiting in the wings that I'm trying to balance, and trying to, get my photogs out the door and get to that breaking news accident. And you're trying to manage and multitask all of these different elements. And it really does need to be quick and to the point with a great visual.
So let me build on that for a second. Leanne, you talked about the desk, and this will be different for all of us, I think, in those perspectives, but tell me what does a newsroom look like? Who are all those people? No matter who gets pitched, somebody's going to be making a decision about what ultimately ends up on the air. Karen, let me start with you. Describe for me, and I know you and Leanne are former colleagues, what did that environment look like? And Dave, maybe jump in on, within a smaller, team setting, how are decisions made, or how do those things work? Karen, let me start with you.
Well, I'm sad to say that my newsroom now looks like this. This is my newsroom back here. I do miss that human interaction, but eventually when it's a safe environment, we can have that back. When Leanne and I were working together, the newsroom was the assignment desk, where all of the phone calls, all of the daily kind of, this is who's doing what, this is what the cameraman's going to get, this person's going in this direction, this person's going, they're assigning basically the stories. We have a morning meeting with our reporters, with our EPs, with our producers. You have a huge hub, and Leanne could probably describe this better, a huge room of producers, and they're writing your content. They're the people who are essentially, when you look at your channels 13, 6, and 10, and the words that are coming out of those anchors' mouths, it's not the anchor that put that together more oftentimes than not, it's your producer. They're the people who are taking the information, putting it together in a succinct, neat little package, and your anchor is there to kind of present it to you, right? Who am I missing, Leanne? There's so many people involved. There's a master control.
Yeah. I was just going to say there's media, our media department, I still say but the master control department, they kind of handle all of the media, the video, the audio. If we're covering something that, doesn't have an actual in-person visual, then, you call it rolling on the Facebook page. You roll on the computer and you record what's on the computer. Sometimes that's done through the computer. Other times it's with a camera sitting in front of the computer, actually recording what's happening. There's a multitude of different things. There's, like Karen said, the photogs, the reporters, the producers, the EPs. You also have news assistants. And those are wonderful people, because they kind of help fill in some of the staffing gaps that are, unfortunately happening more and more in America's newsrooms. And they can help, they can help write, they can help shoot, they can help sit on the assignment desk, they can help answer phones. And I think the one, not just simply because I sat there, but I think it's very important for all publicists to know and understand the role of an assignment editor. Because if you don't get an answer from the reporter that you're trying to pitch, you don't want to just step on your assignment editor to get to that reporter. Talk to them, tell them what's going on, tell them why the story is important, because maybe that other reporter is busy, but your assignment editor would know that and can help still get your story told through a different person. So I think it's very important to know that that role is very important.
So, and it's also going to vary on the newsroom too. Different shops obviously operate different ways, and that goes for every medium, not just TV news. So yeah, bother the assignment desk, bother the reporter. Like I said, you want to do your homework before you reach out, right? And even after you've reached out, just because you hit send on an email doesn't mean that's it, you did your job. If you're hungry, if you're passionate about telling whatever it is you need to tell about your business, about your story, about, your dog, you have to find a way to get it out there and make contact with the people that are gonna get you out there.
Dave, you're in a smaller team environment, not as many of those titles and war rooms. How does a story flow in your world?
In my world, it more stems from me basically being curious about things and just reaching out to people. We try to avoid the general flow of the day-to-day news and not be so responsive to whatever just like press releases landing in our inbox. For some things we can't avoid it. We're going to do an interview later today with Bill Hammond of the Empire Center. We're just going to sort of recap a lot of the nursing home news. But I guess the more useful perspective, because my show is kind of an outlier, would be from the Times Union or the Daily Gazette, and the framework is really comparable to what Leanne and Karen just described in terms of assignment editors and reporters, and making that pitch to reporters, but also talking to assignment editors, because for one, at least in the newspaper business, they're higher up on the totem pole, and these editors can boss these reporters around, especially if they're not being responsive to your story. And I think, though, when you're doing that outreach, though, it's important to recognize, maybe not necessarily on the TV side, but in print, a lot of reporters have very specific beats. They're not like general assignment reporters. And as such, it's important to know who you're pitching to. I mean, I guess you can make that sort of broad appeal, send it to every single email address you have, but it's important to know who the health reporter is. It's important to know who the state government reporter is. It's even important to know, within the state government beat, who specializes on the legislature and who specializes on like long-term investigations. If you send an email to Chris Bragg right now at the Times Union about some, daily newspaper story dealing with state government, he's going to ignore it because he does long-term investigations.
So let me summarize something up to this point. If, Karen, to your point, if I've done my homework and I know I'm reaching out to the right media outlet with the right type of story, and maybe even the right reporter that covers that beat, and for all of you, if that story has all those right elements, it's got impact, it's either got a good audio or video component to it, it's relevant to what's happening around us, it's very timely. If I've got all those things, I have your permission, so to speak, to email, maybe follow up with a phone call, DM you on Twitter, then sit back and maybe even pester your assignment editor and just hope I can then at that point get your attention. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if you're not getting your attention, the question is why, right? What's missing?
Okay, so then let me ask this, and this was one of the questions I think is relevant to the broader group. So I've got a story that has all those elements, but maybe I'm in a field of mental health or problem gambling or something that might have a human element that's a little bit more maybe privacy protected. Folks aren't as willing to go forward and talk about their stories. So let's take one of the questions that came up in our Q&A in the chat. If we're in problem gambling and we want to talk about these issues, but I'm having trouble finding somebody that wants to go on air and say, yes, this is a problem I'm facing, I'm dealing with, and worried about the stigma that might associate myself with that broadly told story. How do I get around those kind of obstacles?
Well, I think for us at Spectrum News, we're in a position right now where we're able to focus more on the person, right? The feature. And we're able to tell news, what's going on in the world, what's going on in our backyards, kind of in a way that, CBS Sunday Morning does, where it's a topic that affects everybody, but it's coming from you, the individual, the person it's impacting, at the most. And we're able to do it in a sensitive way where it's not going to be kind of, the most dramatic and the most crazy headline, and it's just you. So how you present that story is going to be how you come across on television. I'm not really sure. I guess with us, it's a different scenario because we don't have kind of an angle. We don't have the editorial slant. And I'm not saying that there are other in general. I'm speaking in generalities here. So it's easy for us to kind of take your story and literally mirror image what you give us, what you show us, what you tell us. That's what goes on the air. I don't know if that answers your question, Paul.
Yeah, I think so.
like amazed at how Dave can type and pay attention to what you're saying at the same time here.
Paul's been talking.
Questions here, and
So, that made me think of my wife, who's a health reporter for the Times Union. And, throughout the pandemic, there have been a lot of personal sensitive issues that people have tried to deal with. And, people are uncomfortable, coming and talking to her, even after she tries to explain, this is what off the record is, this is what anonymous contributions is, this is background for this or that. And I think it's just important, as you're doing that, to have that conversation with reporters so that they understand and you understand how things are going to be used and how things could be used, because this is, and maybe this isn't exactly what you're talking about, but I find that there's a real big gap between everybody's understanding of terms like on background, on deep background, things that like just are pretty much made up, and just have a conversation about how sources are going to be used. And I think that goes a long way in terms of getting that story on the air. And I think also you need to be prepared. If you're going to have like, I've got one person, but
we have multiple people. Did I just lose audio?
yeah, just for like 2 seconds.
You're back.
I said really profound stuff too, and I just can't remember it anymore. But it was basically,
you're back.
have multiple voices on some of this stuff, because the sourcing policy for like a newspaper is you might need multiple anonymous people in order to have anonymous sourcing.
And trust
Right,
too.
so-
I would also add on the topic of sensitivity, if you're uncomfortable with sharing information, or you're uncomfortable with showing a certain side, or whatever the case is, the story won't get out there. I mean, we can only do so much in our visual way to kind of protect your identity, obviously mask your voice in those regards. But if you're not willing to talk to us, but you just want us to present whatever you're giving us, people don't care about what I have to say. I mean, some of you guys might. I know Dave really cares, but they don't care about Karen. They care about the person they're watching, the person who's being impacted and affected by their story. So it's a fine line. You have to trust that reporter, whether it's the paper, whether it's a television reporter, you have to trust that they have your best interests at heart and that they will respect your wishes. And if they don't, then obviously we're all in a very public medium. You can just take to Twitter and Facebook, and everybody will, take care of them.
I just want to add too, kind of having been on the PR side of this now for a few years, the best way that I describe it to folks in my current role is that you need a character. You need that character, someone who can help tell your story, because it's not, the reporters are physically doing the telling, but it's the character story that is helping it get told. And I think, like Karen was saying, you need to make sure that everybody's comfortable with that. You don't want to put anybody's face out there, doesn't want to have their face out there. So, kind of doing that research, finding that person before you even start pitching, because without the character, you send out this great story, and then you have the reporters coming back and saying, oh, well, do you have somebody that can talk to that? And you say, oh, well, no, I don't really. And then the story doesn't get told, and then you lose credibility as a PR person. You want to make sure that you can supply that person for the reporters.
When Leanne says character, that's not just the person with the most impressive title. That's not just the person who knows the most about the subject. It's the person who's interesting, who has a personality, who likes to joke maybe, who, you want to be friends with. It's, Joe who delivers the mail, who's like a really cool guy, and all I want to do is talk to him all day. I don't want to get back to my kids, right? That person, that's your character. And every business has it, because we all have, individual personalities. That's the person you want selling your product.
And I think that's an important point, which rolls back up to our headline. Why do some stories get told and others don't? And sometimes it's hard to get past that trust. You may have an axe to grind with somebody, and I just want to stir up some trouble and get them in hot water. I'm going to call the news and tell them you've done something wrong, when there may or may not be a legitimate point of view behind that. And I think that can be the role for people like us, Leanne and I, as publicists. It's our job to screen that, to make sure, I've got a good 10 years left in my career, a good 10 years anyway. I'm not going to burn it, this quickly by letting something really sloppy get through or misrepresented. So sometimes we can help act as that filter. But I think that's really one of the reasons why stories can't get told, is because it has those dimensions to it. Dave, you mentioned something a second ago, and let me just do a quick little rapid fire glossary for this group. off the record, is anything ever off the record? Can anybody have a conversation with you, anybody, and feel like it can be off the record?
Yeah, if you say, hey, Dave, I want to go off the record. And I say, sure, Paul, let's go off the record. Then, it's also probably important, though, to say, are we going off the record in the terms that I can't pursue what you're saying in from another source? Are you saying off the record that you're giving me, a tip, but it's not like coming from you? Sometimes people say I'm going off the record when they really mean I have an anonymous thing for you. So it's really just important to say, oh, here's what I have. And as we as reporters, what we're supposed to do then is say, okay, you want to go off the record, off the record in terms of what? Because, I'll get people, let's say they're in the Shmomo administration and they're up the second floor of the Capitol. And to be clear, that was the Cuomo administration. And they'll just be like, I want off the record, here's what's going on. And before anyone's agreed to it, and I just have to go, stop doing this. What are you doing? No, don't do this. You don't have off the record privileges right now. I haven't agreed. And when media outlets send advisories out that say they're embargoed until whatever, and we haven't agreed to embargo, because we are honorable people, we will generally respect that, but there's no responsibility for us to do that. We could just send something out. We haven't agreed to your embargo, and we make fun of you in press rooms.
Okay. So
It's
so
true.
No, he doesn't. What Dave meant to say was trying to play the role of a good publicist. All right, so off the record is really something that should be clarified. I'm
Yes.
calling and saying, hey, Karen, Leanne, I've got something and I need to go off the record on this because I need it to be anonymous, or I can't have it attributed to me, but I really think it's important for you to know it. Feel free to pursue it yourself, etc. And as long as we have that permission granted, almost like air traffic control does with a flight, permission to land. Yes, you have permission to land. You can't just go, yeah, whatever. Okay.
Like Sully.
Embargo. I've seen that before. Somebody will say, hey, listen, I want to get a press release in your inbox Friday at 9 a.m., but you can't do anything with this until Friday at 3 p.m. And the subject is, president, commissioner, somebody is about to be fired, so good luck sitting on that for 9 hours or whatever. So how does that work? If I know I want to make sure you have it, you can get ready for it, or maybe you want to line up some sources, how do I go about giving you a little bit of a heads up and saying, please, it can't get out there until whatever? Call
the person and say, hey, I've got something going on. Can you agree to embargo? And then I'll say, well, an embargo on what? And if it's, a big story, we'll have to, kind of think about it, because I might be able to confirm it elsewhere. And you really just got to walk the person through it. I mean, I have, I think something came out from Capital Roots this week, and they announced the report someday this week. So before it came out, I reached out to them, hey, can I get an embargoed copy of the report just so I can see if I'm interested in this? I mean, that's obviously really low stakes. I mean, not that it's not important, but this scenario you're laying out, which sounds really exciting, and if you've got some tips on this, Paul, I'd like to follow up on it. So I think you just really got to walk through and have that conversation, and just be careful. Don't go too far too fast.
And I would say too, maybe you want to give us something more than just the embargo. Say, look, you can publicize this at 3 and I'll give you an interview before then, so you have everything ready to go. Right. Mm-hmm. And then that way I can trust, okay, this is actually real. This is a big story. And we have all of this already, in a nice.
Yeah, we pre-tape with so sometimes Steve Greenberg from the Siena College Research Institute, they have their poll that comes out and reporters get it embargoed. And so if he's in a President's Day, and in my new gig I get President's Day off, maybe I'll record it the day before, and people can be very accommodating with that, and that's very helpful, because otherwise I'm doing it either a day late or not at all.
Okay. One other glossary term, and I want to come back to something you said, Karen, about or this concept of pre-taping. Background or deep background. What is that, Leanne?
It's an opportunity to from a publicist standpoint, earn the trust of the reporters that you're working with, so that they know that you that there's some meat behind your headline that you're trying to pitch them. But also it gives you an opportunity to let them in and understand exactly what's going on in a particular situation, and let them know what areas are kind of off limits and what can't be told for various reasons. So let's say there's a crisis situation with a client, and they're working with one of the departments of the state. and you're privy to information that would help the reporter move forward with their story, but because the state has asked for that information to not be released because it would hinder any sort of investigation, you just kind of tell the reporter on background, this is where we are with this. This is why we can't move forward. You're giving them your hand and earning that trust between the two of you so that, you protect your client, you protect the story, and you protect the well-being of what that aftermath would be. You're talking about a crisis situation. You don't know what that impact is going to be.
Okay. Karen, Dave, anything to add on background? Or how is that different from a tip, or any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think Leanne pretty much covered it. Tips, look, tips aren't going to get us far. A tip, yeah, it's great and that's fine. And I'm not going to, obviously, I can't tell you the amount of emails I've gotten like, tip, don't say my name. Look, we can't go on TV and say, I got a tip from Maria Smith that this is going on. It doesn't work that way, right? We have to obviously follow up. We have to do our own investigation. We have to get a second, third, fourth source to confirm it. So if you have something that is obviously newsworthy, it's affecting people, it's a big deal, then yeah, give me a tip, but you got to give me a little bit something more, right? And that can stay confidential, that can stay between us. As Dave said, we follow up, we both agree, both parties agree to it. But just a tip in my book, yeah, I'm going to get my best person on the job, and then that'll be it for me, because I've got in my position, I've got a million other things to do.
Let me ask this, and I guess maybe the answer might just be it depends on the reporter. I can imagine that there are some reporters that want to discover something, that just want to be the first to break it, whatever. And yet, as a publicist, sometimes I want to spoon feed you. Here's the story. Here's the angles and the people and their phone numbers and their home addresses and all the stuff you need just presented to you. Does either scenario matter? Does it just come down to personal preference or bandwidth?
Well, I think, there's a difference between, say, enterprise reporting, which it sounds like what Karen's really trying to emphasize, which is, unique reporting to Spectrum versus, a press release or information that a public relations person is handing out to every single news outlet. So I think that's just how we process it differently. If you have a story that's so good that, every outlet is going to want to cover it, then you can spoon feed stuff out like that. But if it's the case where I want a unique story, and it's the merits of the story too, sometimes it only gets that value because I have the unique exclusive. That's kind of the thing to weigh. I know making pitches to outlets, sometimes people say, oh, I saved this one for you, and sometimes as a reporter I'll be like, you're full of shit. You've probably pitched this to like 4 other people who turned you down, and now you're coming to me, and I'm going to be the 5th person to turn you down on it. So, I mean, people try to sell things as exclusives too.
I think I can jump in, Paul, I think this goes back to what we've all been talking about, like know your audience, know your reporter, and know who you're pitching to, because there's a number of stories that I've come across in my time so far that I said, oh my God, I can totally see this reporter telling this story. I think this would be great for them. This is along the lines of the stories that they love to tell. And you do, you let them know, you be honest with the reporter and say, hey, I saw this and I thought of you and I thought it would be great. Let me know if you're interested. If not, I'll move on. Be straight up and honest with them. I don't, all the reporters, they know what's happening. They know I'm paid to get it out there and pitch as many people as humanly possible. So, if you're just upfront and honest about that and know kind of what their beat is and what they're, what they like to tell. And there was a question that we had here about like, how much is too much? How much can we bug you? And about sending the emails and how many times can you send an email? And I wanted to address that because Karen was talking about deleting a bunch of emails. That happens. It's not made up. Like, you come in off of your 2 days off whenever they occur in the week, and you just mass delete all those thousands of emails that you just got. So it's better to send it multiple times on different shifts so that at some point, the people who need to see it. So if you've got a press event on Tuesday that you want somebody to see, send it on Friday afternoon, send it Monday morning, send it Tuesday before the press event. You get everybody. Somebody's going to put it in the grid. Somebody's going to put it on the calendar. And so I think that it's too much if you repetitively call every 10 minutes before the press conference.
Did you get my press release? Did you get my press release? Are you coming to our event? Are you coming? Are you coming?
Right.
Will you be my best friend?
True story. I was on my way to a press event. This is when I was working at Proctor's as their marketing director. And I was on the phone with Leanne about, hey, Leanne, you're on the assignment desk. Just wanted to confirm you guys, am I on your list for this morning? I know we talked a couple days ago. And she said, listen, Paul, I am not BSing you. We just got pulled. There's really kind of a tragic story we really have to cover. It's happening someplace else. I promise you, I'm not lying. And I'm driving along on the thruway, and I look over, and there is the Spectrum News truck missing the exit I'm getting off at. I'm like, I know you're not lying. I totally get that. So Leanne, you were starting to talk about the timeline for this, and this is one of the questions that came up both in our chat here, but also on social media. Somebody commented, what is that timeline? If I have a story happening on Thursday at 10 a.m., an event, something, do I call Wednesday? Do I call a week before? Do I call 3 weeks before? Let me ask all of you, is there a time of, or like how do I make contact, or how soon should I start to reach out, or what is too early, what is too late?
I think it really depends on what it is that you're trying to pitch. If you've got a soft story, but it's a good story, but it's not making headlines, you can really start pitching that a week ahead. People will put it in the calendar, kind of on that schedule that I was saying, week before, a couple days ahead, and then that morning. And I think if you've got a really big story, then the same rules kind of apply, but that might require a phone call that morning. I would never call a week ahead. Don't even call like 2-3 days ahead unless you've got a tip or somebody to pitch out ahead of time, or something embargoed with a really awesome backstory, like all of those things that Dave and Karen were saying. If it's there's also a situation where if you have a really big story, but it's a timed event, but you don't want it to be what we call previewed. You don't want any like morning coverage of it. You don't want any coverage until that event actually happens. You're not sending that press release out until a few hours ahead of time. And then, you make sure that you make your phone calls and let people know about it right then and there. You don't want to send it out a week ahead of time because then, once you send something to a newsroom, it's fair game. Because as we've already talked about, that embargo word doesn't really mean a whole lot unless you have a very candid conversation with the person you're pitching.
I do also want to just let the people who are in here watching and listening, we're in a very unique position at Spectrum right now where we're able to turn stories kind of on a weekly basis. So what's happening with us is people are pitching stories to me on Wednesdays. They pitch 5 stories each. I approve 3. They have a week to put those 3 stories together. So they will show up with a cell phone, not a camera. They will be by themselves. And they will be in your face with that camera, obviously 6 feet included, with face masks, as safe as safe can be these days. And they're going to have the time to kind of put that best product together. And then the EPs and I will get together and discuss where is this going to air. And we actually have the opportunity to layer the show. So if you do have, let's say, a ribbon cutting, and you think it would be great and you want it covered, okay, reach out to one of my reporters or to me the week before so that we can get that character that we were talking about and do the story with that character, come, spray, shoot a little bit of the ribbon cutting, and then my reporter can put together the best piece of work, and then I can make sure that I get somebody from your office to come and do a talk back or a Q&A over Zoom to accompany that piece, right? Because right now, we're in a position where we're not building a newscast just flying by the seat of our pants. We're building thoughtful pieces of kind of art, is the way I look at it, where everything is layered. Right? It's a blank canvas. We get a story. On top of the story, we get our guests to come in. And it's not just go, go, go. And then the newscast is over and it's, man, I really wish I would have done that differently. No, we have the time to do it. So keep that in mind too, when you're talking specifically about Spectrum.
So showing up with this, a reporter showing up with this is now legitimate.
Yeah.
great.
Why not? I mean, technology
Right.
is at a place
Sure.
now that and it keeps building and it keeps developing. And why should we have gigantic, heavy cameras that are
Right.
intimidating? Let's be
Yep.
honest. I've showed up to many horrible, the worst days of people's lives, and I stick a camera in their face and a microphone, and I expect them to be vulnerable with me. That's impossible. Nobody wants that. But you have people that are standing on the street observing things and Facebook living them and streaming them on Twitter. And guess what? Are those people journalists? Well, it depends on who you ask, but it's accessible. Everybody has an iPhone and everybody can use it to their advantage, I guess. So why not do it?
Yeah, well, that's great. Here's a question. This was on a few that were submitted ahead of time, and someone just put it in the chat. So talk to me about COVID and issues like COVID and Black Lives Matter. How has that impacted news storytelling outside of staying 6 feet away from folks? But when you have these major events in our society, how does that change things up? Does everything have to be about COVID, or how does that impact what gets covered at that time?
Well, for us, I guess two things. One, following the killing of George Floyd and the sort of surge of the BLM movement, we've made a conscious effort to try to have more people of color as guests. So, if you're a PR firm and you've got people of color, I mean, and I know this is something at the TU as well, where, they're trying to emphasize these voices more. So, play to that, recognize that we're not necessarily looking for, the old bald white guy to come on and tell us about, the politics of inner cities anymore, and that which is long overdue and good. But then with regards to COVID, for us, it's just trying to find, a different story, a new story. It's been 11 months of talking about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities, say, of color or people in rural areas. So, that hasn't not lessened in importance 11 months later, but you need to find new ways to cover it. So we recently had someone pitch us about how we could be doing these self-awareness campaigns about type 2 diabetes, so people can learn to manage their blood sugar, which is more critical than ever, considering how you're not going to fare too well if you get COVID-19 and you've got type 2 diabetes and out of control blood sugar. So it's about finding that story that hasn't been told yet, and seizing on that important narrative still.
Yeah, and anybody who tells you, oh, I'm so sick of all these COVID stories on the news, I'm just going to change the channel. Look, the truth of the matter is we're dealing with it. These are things, the reason why they're making headlines, the reason why they're in the paper and on the radio and on the news is because that's life. You don't like it, you can pick what you want to watch somewhere else. Go to Netflix, go to Hulu, and that's what people are doing. People are spending on average how many hours a day on some sort of streaming device? So if you don't like it, 5, more than 5, Dave, I assure you. Unfortunately, that is the world we're living in, and we've always been just a mirror. That's our job, is to mirror what's going on out there. And as Dave said, you want to present it in a different way, maybe. Yeah, we are talking about COVID because it's still very much relevant. Black Lives Matter, all of that is very much in the news. But how are you telling that story? Who's telling that story?
I have to tell all of my clients that, no matter what, your life is still moving forward. Your business is still moving forward with or without COVID. And, so you're reaching milestones, you're doing things, you're having projects that are newsworthy, but unless you can relate it to COVID right now, you don't have as much of a possibility of it getting covered. You've got to stay relevant. You could have the best award given to your company, but unless you can somehow relate it to COVID and make it relatable for the general public that they're interested, it's not going to get told.
And I know we're saying this, and I completely agree about how COVID dominates the news. At the same time, there is an appetite for other stories too, and things off the beaten path. And it's just the I guess standard for that now is a little higher. That bar that you're gonna have to clear is a little higher because you're competing with a novel coronavirus.
So one of the questions that came up, and this is building on something we were talking about before, newsrooms are busy, your inbox is jammed, it's hard to get through that. I think one of the early answers is to build up relationships with reporters over time so that you have some trust established, you have some perspective established. That makes sense. But all that said, are there ways, and I think the comment was like, should I send a pizza on top, with my release taped on top of it? And, I remember back, and Karen, I think we might have even pitched you or Leanne on this when I was again at Proctor's. We had an announcement about a 5-year partnership with Cirque. And we created a Viewmaster. Anybody remember those Viewmasters when you were a kid, the little disc, and you put it in and you kind of click through to the photos? And it was sent to the newsroom and it said, "The Cirque is coming, date and time." And there was a card, "Please join us for a special news announcement." And even folks had commented on social media. They took a picture of it and they were like, "Wow, you've got my attention." I always wondered as we did that, is that a gimmick? Does that, does a pizza really matter? Are there other ways like that to break through? Or is that just like, oh gosh, come on, guys?
I mean, it mattered to me because I have a background in theater. I enjoyed anything that you pitched me. I wanted to be there for every story. But again, know your reporter, right? Know your person.
Right, exactly.
For me, that little gimmick was really cool and I loved it. Do we like pizza? Yes. Do we like cookies and, fruit baskets? Sure. Are people as willing to accept them nowadays? I don't know. Depends on, the newsroom. But again, if there's a story, then yes, that product, that gimmick works. If it's missing all the other stuff, it's just like, oh yeah, I got this cool Planet Fitness hat for New Year's Eve, and what am I going to do with it? Everybody goes around putting it on their head and taking this stupid picture. Like, it doesn't get us to cover Planet Fitness, right? It's just a thing.
As an aspiring triathlete, I'm uncomfortable with pizzas being sent out, but but realistically, actually, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of getting something that's useful. Like, you send me a pizza, I'm almost less likely, to cover it, because that's kind of like trying to send me a gift, especially if I don't know you. The DEC commissioner has been on our show a bunch of times, and I will ask them for free stuff. And they send us like DEC sunglasses and stuff. And that's because I have an existing relationship with him, and we're going to have him on the show regardless. Or the Nature Conservancy sent me like a hat, and I have Jessica Otney-Mahar on the show anyway. But if you're just going to send me random stuff that's not like garbage, I'm almost be less inclined to have you on, because I'm going to be like, boy, am I making this decision because they sent me a $50 gift card to Le Cirque, which would be more appealing to me? Or is this because this is an interesting story? So I wouldn't go about sending that. And especially, if I think about my old colleagues at the Times-Union, if you sent like random stuff, again, it's going to be the mockery again behind your back.
But just to be clear, Dave, could you just give us your clothing sizes? Shirt size?
Aspiring clothing sizes or actual right now? Because there's a pandemic size and there's a pre-pandemic size.
We're working together on that. He'll tell you.
Given and I appreciate you dressing up for this and wearing a tie. I wasn't clear where the tie should be worn. So thank you for
no problem.
So let me ask, and we've got about 8 minutes left. Let me ask a bit about digital first. Is there a race to get it out there, or is it just a complementary media?
Yes.
Which one?
All right, good.
Yeah, at the TU, yeah, you have to get stuff out first. I mean, there's an emphasis on it. My wife will be at a press conference, and my wife's Bethany Bump, if anybody knows who that is, Times-Union health reporter. She'll be at a press conference and be like tweeting it, and at the same time, Mike Goodwin, the city editor, will be crunching those tweets into something that they can get on the web ASAP, because there are a bunch of people they're competing with. So the only thing that's going to separate them is if their story is up first. At the same time, digital is just another component, and I think about how you want to be able to present interesting digital aspects, like say a map or something to go with your story, and we have people like that. So, be aware that the Times-Union has Kathleen Crowley, who does data visualization. If you've got a cool tool or idea for something that can be presented that way, they're going to go for it, because we all want to have the next New York Times snowfall project and get accolades from our colleagues, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, push alerts are very important for us. I mean, anything that'll get your attention on your cell phone that pops up and says, this is happening now, or this is breaking news now. The web department is vital and very important in disseminating that information.
Let me ask, we've got time for another quick question about it. Let me ask about exclusives. All things being equal, I've got a story, it's relevant to you and your audience, it has all those other factors. If I offer you an exclusive, is that of interest? Does that sweeten the deal, or is it?
Yes.
And again, it depends on what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Second
Right.
that.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
The $250 check presentation from or to the Little League.
You're just gonna blow that right here? You're gonna in front of Karen? Come on, I thought that was my exclusive.
Well, we talked about this in our pregame, and I think somebody had asked this question. Dave, you might have typed an answer
Tim,
offline,
cancel
but
cancel the
cancel the check
covering.
presentation. How do you take those sort of more routine day-to-day stories? And a $250 check presentation from a company to the Little League, probably not newsworthy. But Leanne always reminds me, but if a 4-year-old set up a lemonade stand and raised $250 in their neighborhood for the Little League because
Yeah.
their older brother or sister, that's newsworthy. What is it? Dog bites man, not newsworthy. Man bites dog, newsworthy.
I don't know if I've ever said that, but if that message came through, I guess I succeeded.
Well, it's true. I mean, think about like the Department of Health shutting down a kid's lemonade stand is a bigger deal than the Department of Health, coming in and just shutting down a restaurant. So yeah, I mean, you have to have some sort of hook for it, for that check presentation, or maybe it's buying, with that Little League, the newsstand or something that was stolen or something like that.
Right.
If you're coming through and that was the big story, because there could be a follow up. If the dugout was burned down and you're giving the money to rebuild it, then yeah, that could be a follow up, and the kids have hope, and Johnny can now go to the majors.
I just wrote the whole story. Amazing.
Thank you.
I think
this is how news gets told.
Important, kind of elevating it a little bit and looking at it from, 10,000 feet, there's certain elements that need to be in every story. One is a character. That character doesn't always have to be, the compelling character that's crying on your shoulder in the middle of the story. It can be the head of DEC telling a story, to use David's example. You always need to have that character, and you always still also need to have a visual. Like, Dave was saying that, like, if you're at a press conference and you've got Twitter going and you need that visual, you need that extra component to accompany the web. It's not just a newspaper story anymore. Everyone needs a visual component because, let's face it, we all have the attention span of a gnat, and we need something pretty to look at when we're reading our news. So if you have that visual to accompany your previously denoted newspaper story, it will also go a lot further. And those are two major components that, a story needs to have in order to be told. And of course, it also needs to be newsworthy. It has to be interesting. You can't just have a really fun character and have the story be boring. And I see that there's a representative from the Mohawk Hudson Humane Society on here as one of our attendees. Sometimes that character can be a dog. It can be a cat that needs a home. That works.
But for television, unfortunately, a picture of that dog or cat isn't going to cut it. It's not going to work. Everybody loves animals. Everybody loves looking at animals, talking about animals, petting animals. Maybe not everybody, but for the most part, people love it. It's good TV. We love animal stories. But without actually getting to be there and see them panting and kissing and licking and all of this stuff, like, it's a picture.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've got about a minute and a half left. Parting thoughts, summary thoughts, Dave.
So let's see, anything on here? Localize it. Obviously, I think we try to talk about this, but there's national stories going on. Find a way to tie it to something local, or if you're the energy producer in New York and you're seeing that there are big power outages in Texas, just want to make it clear to you guys that this is something that would never happen in New York because of XYZ. Would you like to hear my expert? Be cognizant of the news, be prepared, to have your experts pitching, based on whatever's going on in the news, and make those people accessible, very accessible. Not to say they have a window 1 to 2 p.m. and they can contact you, via a telegram. That's no good.
Karen, parting thoughts?
I would just add to that, be curious about everything and everybody. So in your company, you should know about every single person that works for you. Do they like their toilet paper top side up or underside? How do they swing that? I'm just saying, random things.
There's only one answer to that, Karen.
I brought this up with my reporters and they said the same thing, but random things like that, ask questions about your staff, ask questions about us. And I don't know if you've noticed from some of the people here on this panel, people love talking about themselves. So, you know, if you pitch to Dave and say, hey, Dave, I really admired this piece that you did or that show that you had and what you said, maybe you'll get Dave's attention. Maybe you'll get my attention and engage me in a conversation. And then, hey, all of a sudden, oh, by the way, I have a pitch.
And don't be full of shit when you make that. Like, say, oh, I listen to the show all the time,
no.
and then you're like, I haven't been on the air for like 2 weeks or something.
Absolutely.
Because then it's the worst.
Yes.
Dave,
But that brings
Paul
me
from
back to
Loudonville.
doing your homework, right? Actually spend the time. If you really care about something that you're pitching, spend the time, invest the time, do your homework into the people that are going to get your story out there, and ask the questions. Be curious.
There's a generic email that sometimes goes out. It's like, you know, dear so-and-so, they have this font that goes in and it says like, we've been following your coverage on blah, blah, blah. And like, you look at the email and it's from like Steve in like San Diego. And it's like, this person has no idea who I am or what this is. It was sent to 100,000 people, but I'm going to have to go to San Diego now and punch this guy right in the face. So yeah.
Dave, this is Paul from Loudonville, longtime listener, first time caller.
Oh.
Leanne, parting thoughts?
I think, you know, just for the publicists that are attending with us, I think, you know, it's important to, you know, like we've been, you know, certain themes that we've been having this whole conversation. Know who you're pitching to. Make sure you've got good elements of the story, and you know, you should be the one asking the questions to your client before it gets to the reporter. You've got to think like a reporter and be asking those questions. You know, I've had people come to me and ask like, oh, we've got a check presentation. Is that going to get covered? No, it's not. It's just not. I'm sorry, Paul, your check presentation is not happening today. And you need something else to go with it. You know, everybody loves to see a company that's philanthropic in the community and helping the community. But why are you doing that? What's behind it? You know, if my mother is a heart survivor, so if you've got a story about the Heart Association or someone who's overcome vast struggle to survive, you know, that's a good story. And oh, they made a donation too. You know the background.
Sounds great. I'll let that be the final word. Thank you to everybody. I know we're running a few minutes late, but thank you to the attendees that are staying with us. Thank you very much to the panel for making your time and sharing it with this audience, both here on Zoom and on social media. I think this has been really helpful. Dave, I had no idea that you were related to Bethany. That's hysterical.
Only through marriage.
So no, and I think this was really good. I think this really helped answer some of those questions about why do some stories get told, others don't? How does a newsroom work? How do I get your attention and really find the right fit for it? So thank you for sharing all of these perspectives with our audience. We'll keep everybody on the list for future webinars on similar topics. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Good night and good luck.